When dipping my toes into the world of TBL, more so YouTube series, I was apprehensive. I of course didn't want to put an entire country's queer media into a box, as I know there are a lot of hardworking Thai directors and writers, but the sheer amount of poorly produced series that come out every year definitely take the lead. Finding a genuinely good show can be far and few between, and because of that, Thailand's poor reputation in the world of BL is extremely prominent. Given this prior experience, I was nervous about giving Bad Buddy a try. I didn't want to be disappointed again. But, to my surprise, I fell in love with the show almost instantaneously. Though the first 2 episodes cling tighter to things I've seen before from GMM TV, by episode 3, I was hooked. Okay, this is where I could definitely get flamed, and I don't want my ass virtually beaten, so I'm gonna make a disclaimer. This is all my opinion, and by default, I'm extremely underqualified to judge literally anything. Despite knowing that, I'm gonna do it anyway. And if you don't like my opinion about something, that's fine. I love and encourage discourse and engaging with opposing points of view, but please be sure to keep it civil. I think both of these shows should be appreciated on their own without tearing the other down. And I encourage you to form your own individual opinion about both of these series separate from one another. Okay, I'm just gonna rip off the band-aid. Bad Buddy was everything Together wasn't. Allow me to explain. Together the series was the first Thai BL I ever watched. And of course, I will give credit where credit's due. The entire viewing experience was incredibly enjoyable, and I found myself laughing hysterically more often than not. In my opinion, Together was meant to be mostly comedic and not taken too seriously, but there was a problem. When describing the show to my surrounding peers, I found myself using that narrative as a crutch. I felt almost embarrassed for enjoying the show as much as I did, and I knew that it was objectively bad. I knew that if I had shown it to anyone who wasn't already immersed in BL culture, they probably would have laughed at me. While I'm sure that Together really was meant to be as lighthearted and silly as I interpreted it to be, that shouldn't be the sole factor that holds the show together. As much fun as I had watching it, and as much as I wish I could go back to the way I felt during that period, I can't. Once I had left the show to sit in the back of my brain for a while, its major flaws started to poke out to me. My not-so-controversial opinion is that Together is only as popular as it is because of the timing of which it came out. While I do think the series would have been relatively popular on its own, given it's similar to other BL that was airing at that point, I think its perfect timing is really what pushed it into that sweet spot for a lot of people. We associate these shows with the memories from that time. It was something easy to get us by, and there's nothing wrong with that. This show could be potentially perfect for that audience, and I think for a lot of people it was. But I think if people took the time to compare it to what we have now, they would see that Together is extremely flawed. Again, there's nothing wrong with enjoying objectively flawed media. I love myself a good shit show every once in a while. But I really wish the BL community as a whole would raise our standards. There are so many other amazing series that came out that year and the years following that didn't get nearly as much credit. I see this happen time and time again with so many different series, and it saddens me that we keep choosing to settle. As I mentioned before, finding queer media can be hard in of itself, let alone finding queer media as good as mainstream television and film. What I'm getting at is if Bad Buddy had aired instead of Together at that time, I honestly think it would have been just as popular, if not more. For starters, Bad Buddy's cast is really where the show shines. The delightful chemistry between the 2 leads is not at all unheard of. I'd say it's actually one of the saving graces for Thai BL. But Omen Nanan's on and off-screen chemistry is so intertwined that I can't help but feel a genuinely emotional bond between Pat and Pran. Every argument, every kiss, every interaction felt natural, and their performances were extremely immersive. Even looking beyond the main couple, all of Bad Buddy's characters are effortlessly tangible. For example, the female supporting characters weren't just another plot device. Instead, it created a beautiful balance of world building and atmosphere. Through her, we not only get to see Pat and Pran grow up, but the people around them, creating a sense that we'd known these characters all their lives. At the end of the day, she does push Pat in the right direction, but it's ultimately Pat himself who realizes his feelings and decides to pursue them. Speaking of Pat, his sister Pa is another great example of a well-written female character. Not only was she a great foil for Pat, but she was nothing but supportive of his relationship. Throughout the show, it was made abundantly clear that she wasn't just Pat's sister. She was very much an individual, and always added a unique and comedic presence whenever she was around. Her dynamic with Om was natural, ensuring that Pa's overwhelming support and love for her brother ultimately feels earned. The show really used her down-to-earth attitude to its advantage, and really let her character shine. Shifting back to Together the series, we have Pear. Funnily enough, Pear, also played by Love, is in direct contrast to Pa. That is a tongue twister, good god. Pear's entire function in the story was to further push Tyne into finding his identity. She was used almost entirely as a plot device, and once Tyne no longer had any romantic interest in her, they basically just tossed her aside until still together. While I definitely think Earn had more to offer, she ended up almost entirely useless as well. Seeing her end up with Pear definitely would have been more endearing in my opinion. I know we're on the topic of female side characters, so I know you're just itching to hear about Pam, so I will discuss her briefly. But the last 2 episodes of Together frustrate me beyond belief, and I just do not have the time to delve into that as much as I'd like. just know I think the whole situation is utter BS. Pam is a perfect example of a superficial conflict. The whole issue that revolves around her is a sloppy attempt to stir up more tension, so that the final resolution feels more satisfying. I understand why writers do this, and I know it's extremely common practice, but as an audience member, it was so frustrating. I think we can all agree misunderstandings that could have been easily resolved but continue to be dragged out make the viewer want to tear their eyeballs out and sell them to the nearest vendor. If the only way to make your conflict work is by having your characters behave completely out of character, you're doing something wrong. In my opinion, Tyne and Sadowat's relationship is already on thin ice. Throughout the show, they fail to demonstrate a large amount of trust, and the relationship can feel really unstable at times. So by completely demolishing every bit of trust they had and causing them to have to start over from square one in the final 2 episodes, it just feels like such a slap in the face to anybody who invested time into this show. That's all I'll say for now, as I'm sure everyone has come to a similar conclusion about that, and I'm just wearing it out, so we will move on, for the sake of time. One of my biggest nitpicks about Together the series was its use of side couples. More so, how it felt like every side character had to be gay for the sake of being gay. I know that on paper, that makes me sound like a homophobic fuckboy, but honestly, it felt like every one of those characters was introduced just to be a love interest for somebody from the opposing side. And on top of that, introduced way too late in the story. I'm not saying all these relationships had a lack of sustenance or anything like that, because that wouldn't be true, but it did feel really forced, and it was kind of uncomfortable, for me anyway. Something Bad Buddy did really well was avoid that. While yes, Ink and Pa are side characters that eventually end up together, it was because they had already established a platonic relationship many years prior to the events of Bad Buddy. And Ink had romantic feelings for Pa throughout all of it. The seeds were laid for that relationship early on, and the characters weren't introduced solely as each other's love interests. Together felt like it was forcing all of its side relationships to happen, so people would point and say, look, more gay relationships. But Ink and Pa didn't feel like that. Obviously, we're very starved for sapphic representation, so a lot of people did point at these two and say something along those lines. But that's mostly because of GMMTV's lack of representation in general, and it had nothing to do with wanting brownie points from the audience. Additionally, it came up entirely on its own and didn't need a lot of superficial plot points to string the two together. They explore Ink and Pa's relationship more on their side series, but that alone really shows the time and dedication the writers put into making this relationship feel well developed. Back to the point, I have to applaud Bad Buddy for the way that they handled Wyatt and Corin's relationship. I know a lot of people expected them to end up together in typical GMMTV fashion. The way that they averted everyone's expectations, even up to the last episode, look, I love a good bromance, and I think their dynamic is funny and likable. But I really liked that they didn't force these two into being something that they weren't, purely because they were the only 2 characters left to pick apart. Despite their flirtatious nature, I feel like a relationship that was anything more than platonic wouldn't have made sense for them. Lastly, the use of music in Bad Buddy was flawlessly done. I could not even count how many times Together made me full body cringe every time somebody pulled out a guitar. Those scenes were really long and uncomfortable, and honestly, poorly done. I think we can all agree that singing or musical scenes in TBL are very hit or miss. I gotta say, when they mentioned the music contest in Bad Buddy, I was nervous. I'm not trying to diss anybody from the cast of Together, but Nanan is genuinely very talented, and they didn't overuse his talent at all. I didn't feel like they were forcing romantic serenades or anything like that. Pran's love for music was simply another part of his personality and a love language between him and Pat, something that has brought them together since they were kids. I know that Together uses music, more specifically Scrub, as a way of showing that Tyne and Sadowat were destined to meet again. More importantly, destined to be together. But honestly, they beat this dead horse for way longer than they should have. It made me kinda despise music scenes in BL for a little bit, just a little bit, just a little while. But you know. I don't want to end things on a negative note, so I'm gonna say this. I know this video was almost entirely a comparison between 2 completely separate pieces of media made at 2 separate times, and I know that in comparing these 2 shows, there is some unfairness, but that's sort of why I left out the plots of both shows entirely. It wouldn't be fair trying to compare apples to oranges in that sense. The message I wanted to convey in this video is as follows. If you find a show that is everything you liked about another show, but they do it better, you've hit the jackpot. The point of this video is not to say that you can't like Together, or you have to like Bad Buddy. In fact, there's nothing wrong with liking or disliking either of them. Bad Buddy isn't untouchable, just like any other piece of media. It has its moments. And I don't think there's ever going to be this perfect TBL, but I think we should use Bad Buddy as an example when striving in the right direction. I don't think Bad Buddy would be what it is now without its predecessors, like Together. So I think it's important that we appreciate Together for everything that it was, while still being able to recognize everything that it wasn't. I don't think this video is going to change the minds of the masses or anything, but I hope it encourages you to not only watch Bad Buddy and or Together, but to encourage more of you to set your standards higher when it comes to the types of queer media you're consuming. The gays deserve better. I hope you found this video enjoyable despite the increase in negativity. I know neither of these shows are really considered topical, as they both finished airing ages ago, but better late than never. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and I will see you later. Bye!